Hello, everyone. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Deepam. I'm the Center Manager for Bishan Learning Center, and I will be your host. All right. Today's speaker will be Miss Amira, our educational therapist and specialist tutor, who will be sharing her experiences with you. Before further ado, do let me introduce Miss Annaberta Olas, our head of DAS International, to say a few words. Hi, Anna.
Hi, hello everyone. Hi everyone. Thank you, Dee, for the introductions. A warm welcome to you all, our parents, teachers, allied educators. I'm your host, along with Deepam, my co-host, and our specialist teacher, Miss Amira. We bring you DAS International's 10th anniversary webinar series. With a spotlight today on specialist teachers like Miss Amira. Just a quick background, just to share with everyone on how the Spotlight on Specialist Teachers series has come about. I interact a lot in my work with families and schools over the years, and I wanted really a platform for us to be able to share directly and engage with all of you, our community of parents, teachers, specialists. And I thought better way than to invite and hear everyone to hear directly from our specialist teachers who have quietly but steadfastly been supporting our students who have specific learning differences such as dyscalculia, ADHD, dyslexia. It is my hope that through the Spotlight series, our specialist teachers are then able to share tips and topics that are close to their hearts and on the work that they do every day. So allow me to introduce Amira, our educational therapist and specialist teacher, for today's sharing on supporting specific learning differences in the classroom. Hi, Amira. Amira holds a deep interest in students with special needs, and she has a background of working as a behavioral therapist in her previous job for children with autism. And she currently is our DAS specialist teacher as well as DAS educational therapist for our group classes. Amira believes that every child really deserves the chance to find their own meaning of success and not what society expects from them. If you will later on see her, she has a lot of stories on how she teaches her students. And in her free time, she offers her knowledge and experience as well as a volunteer for a non-profit organization, the Widad Project, with their efforts to develop community locally and overseas. Thank you so much, Amira, for sharing today. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me during your lunch hour, and I hope you've had a great morning so far. I'm very excited to start today's webinar, which I hope you are able to gain many insights from. Today's webinar is about supporting comorbidities or co-occurrences of specific learning difficulties in the classroom. So firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Amira, and I'm a specialist tutor and educational therapist at Dyslexia Association of Singapore and DAS International. I work with students with dyslexia and other specific learning difficulties in both group and one-to-one settings. I also used to be a behavior therapist working with children with autism. So before we get into the teaching strategies, let's have a quick look at what SpLD is. So SpLD is an umbrella term for several learning difficulties, and we shall have a look at them very soon. So SpLD covers a range of learning difficulties that affects a person's ability to process information, language expression, fluency in spoken and written language, and even mathematical ability. Some developmental difficulties also include physical ones, like a person's organization of movement, gross and fine motor. When these components are affected, so does the process of learning. Hence, the journey becomes a lot harder and effortful therefore needing a unique and tailored style of teaching. And it's also important to note that a person diagnosed with SpLD are not intellectually disabled or an effect of their socio-economic and language background. So here are some examples of SpLD. We, of course, have dyslexia, and some other common ones are attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, and dyscalculia. So most people would have only heard of the first two, dyslexia and ADHD, but the other dys terms refer to various challenges experienced by a person that subsequently makes learning difficult. So for today, we will be focusing on ADHD and dysgraphia, co-occurring together with dyslexia, as well as autism or Asperger's syndrome, which are not categorized as an SpLD, but I would also like to discuss it as a comorbidity with dyslexia. Predominantly in DAS, we support students who are diagnosed with dyslexia in areas like literacy, math, and even their creative ability. We'll be talking about dyslexia, and it is actually a common learning difficulty that stems from a deficit in phonological component of language. That is difficult for dyslexic learners to store and recall speech sounds, and subsequently struggling to match a sound to its representational form. For example, I'm going to give a simple example. When I'm going to give sounds, and I want you to form them together, to join them together into a word, and tell me what word it is. B, r, a, sh. You catch that? So the word should be brush. So that is what I mean by matching the sound to its representational form of letters. Some dyslexic learners, they will maybe miss out one of the sounds. For example, instead of brush, they will say bash, for example, and maybe even an entirely different letter, like instead of the B, they will hear P, for example, so it becomes brush. So that's an example of the difficulty that they experience. And of course, it gives rise to poor spelling as well. So they also face difficulties in word recognition and reading comprehension. Therefore, the task of reading itself and understanding what they've read may not be an easy task at all. So logically, dyslexic learners have an aversion towards language tasks, which is often misunderstood as laziness. Attention, behavioral, and emotional problems may arise due to the learning challenges that they face. This is one example of work done by one of my students. So this example explains the difficulty faced in spelling. Yeah, so my student here struggles a lot with spelling and phonological awareness. There's a lot of reversals for the letter B and D, for the words robot and rye. So this is an example of a reversal. And some of the words here, the sound did not match with the correct letter. For example, here, pod comes pot. For example, this sentence, the dry and slimy frog hopped into the tub. Even as a sentence as simple as this might be challenging to some early learners, the effort that they need to put in. All right, so there is no known cure for dyslexia, as it is a lifelong condition. Nevertheless, interventions backed up by studies can be tailored according to their needs to help them achieve success. Our students of different types of SpLD come to us at DAS International to receive the support that they require. Dyslexia interventions are all based on OG principles. The next one, I will talk more about how to make the classroom dyslexia friendly by using colors and fonts. Okay, the first one, OG principles help to tailor lessons according to the students' needs. And these have been proven to be effective strategies, as essentially when adopting these principles, lessons are structured from one lesson to another, and throughout the long term, sequential and cumulative, such that the strategies and skills taught are gradual and step-by-step, multisensory to stimulate their thinking, diagnostic and prescriptive, which is to be according to the learner's needs, cognitive so that the learners understand what and why they are learning the strategies, and finally, emotionally sound to boost motivation and self-esteem. So besides tailored programs, other aspects like the learning environment and tools should also be centered around being dyslexia friendly. So for example, studies have shown that dyslexic learners read better with buff, cream, and pastel colors, rather than the usual black font on white paper or screens, which is too glaring even for us non-dyslexics. And also the use of highlighters and different colored markers is highly encouraged because it really aids their attention and the eye tracking when they read the words on the whiteboard or worksheet. All right, so next, the choice of font is also extremely important, obviously to ensure clarity of words. These common ones, Comic Sans, Arial, Tahoma, Verdana, and Century Gothic have also been found to be the best ones, as the letters, as you can see from these examples, the letters are not close to each other. And for me personally, I love to use Century Gothic because the letters are very rounded and also quite far apart. Okay, so I should also add that the ideal font is 12 to 14 and no underlining at all, as it will disrupt the letters and make them harder to read. So what's better is to actually use block letters or just bold them. Not even italic, because italic also distorts the letters. So finally, we have come to the part where I discuss the phenomenon of two or more SpLD conditions co-occurring in a learner and how a holistic intervention program should be curated around their varied needs. Yeah. So for today's presentation, I will only be discussing comorbidities of dyslexia with ADHD, dysgraphia, and Asperger's syndrome. Okay, because many teaching strategies can be applied to not just one pair. I will share them in general while also explaining how they work. All right, so the first one, ADHD. Okay, so it has three types: inactiveness, hyperactivity, or a combination of both. Okay, so you can actually observe a person might have ADHD from behaviors like short attention span, slow processing or response time. They prefer to move around instead of sitting for a period of time. They are unable to focus and carry out instructions, basically. Yeah, this comorbidity is quite common. About 53 to 72% of dyslexic learners as a whole actually do experience effects of ADHD as well. So if I would like to share my own experience with my own students, I have numerous students who have this condition, this preference of not sitting or staying in their seat. So for example, one of them are young girl, so she's hardly ever seated in her chair. So she's either standing, dancing, walking around, pointing at the whiteboard. So because of that condition, right, I allow them, and it should be allowed in especially interventions, because they need that movement to be engaged. When ADHD is coupled with the difficulties of having dyslexia and ADHD, the learner would have huge challenge to retain and apply what was last taught to them. As a result, their academic performance becomes inconsistent and obviously further affecting their literacy skills. So when they need to move around a bit, right? When they do that too much and not participating, it would affect their organizational skills too. And learning, of course, will become a difficult task, leading to external behavior like task incompliance and disengagement. But nevertheless, some learners have shown the possibility of giftedness and creativity. So that was ADHD. We move on to the next comorbidity, which is dyslexia and dysgraphia. As for dysgraphia, it is one of the common SpLD co-occurring with dyslexia. It refers to impairment in two things: motor processing and information processing. Problems with motor skills gives rise to messy handwritings or pencil grip, therefore making the task of writing to be very slow and very difficult for them. Also, problems with information processing causes learners to have trouble organizing and expressing their thoughts, hence affecting overall literacy performance. For my own students, I've had one or a few actually, which had problems with this motor skills. So it's very obvious that for one, it's very obvious in their work that their handwriting is very messy and very uncontrolled. But when you prompt them to write nicely, they can do it, but with a lot of effort that that kind of attention will be taken away from actually focusing on the work itself, so that attention will become directed to writing nicely. So that's why it affects their overall literacy or learning experience. When dysgraphia is coupled with dyslexia, it is very problematic. Their poor literacy skills and language expression naturally leads to much frustration, low self-esteem, and task incompliance. When a learner displays such behavior, it is challenging for them to have any motivation at all to participate in lessons. So lastly, we have dyslexia co-occurring with autism or Asperger's syndrome. Asperger's syndrome is basically a high-functioning form or type of autism. And this occurs about 14% of all dyslexic learners. So autism is categorized by deficits in their cognition and abnormalities in their social interaction as well. Some signs that can be observed include the way they express their feelings and emotions, or even empathy, as they communicate with less expression. Okay, so it can come off as quite monotonous, out of touch with their emotion. So autism affects their ability to read contextual clues as well, and implied meaning, especially in reading comprehension. There's a lot of skills that test their understanding of implied meaning. Okay, so behavior-wise, they find it difficult to maintain attention and also to imitate. And for students with AS, they, when triggered with high levels of anxiety, lead to meltdowns. And usually this might happen in classrooms with other students. So a lot of students or teachers might deem that as very disruptive. So when coupled with challenges of dyslexia, learners with autism or Asperger's syndrome find it even harder to process visual and auditory cues. And as mentioned before, high-level comprehension skills are also become difficult to tackle due to their occasional meltdowns or lack of social skills with their peers. Learners with this comorbidity may face seclusion from their peers as they are deemed to be disruptive, like I mentioned before. So they might disrupt others and they might disrupt their own learning as well. Nevertheless, the strengths in other areas like design, logic, and creativity might arise from some individuals. All right, so it is important to make use of their strengths when tailoring a lesson. The next question is, how do we make use of all that knowledge and provide the support they need, right? So in sharing some strategies, I have branched them out to be first, daily routine, teacher's instructions, differentiation, multisensory, preference-based, and so awareness and acceptance. Learners do well when they are informed upfront of the activities of the day because it actually reduces anxiety. They're not questioning what's going to happen during the lesson. And crossing them off in a checklist also provides a sense of achievement, which then builds their confidence. And it is also important to plan the structure of the lesson itself around the learner's profile. And then, for example, they usually need breaks in between tasks because you should remember that literacy tasks like spelling or reading are very effortful for them. So those little breaks in between are actually part of the intervention, and it's important in aiding in their learning. So for my own experience, I have students who current students actually, like, I do have to give them a break in between almost every task because he has very short attention span, and it doesn't allow him to absorb anything else that I say. If it gets too long, you can just see on their face that they're not engaged anymore. So that's when they really need the break and to re-energize. So especially for conditions like ADHD and Asperger's, the teacher should keep their instructions short and clear while giving only one or two at a time, so that the learners are able to catch up and process them within their means. The teacher should also empathize when their learners need the instructions to be repeated and actually be okay with that and not get frustrated. But the third one is differentiation, which is basically being mindful of each and every student's ability. So it's about anticipating the response coming from each learner. The teacher actually needs to consider the level of difficulty of the task that the learner can manage, and then the amount of work given to prevent anxiety and promote a sense of achievement instead of consistent failure. Yeah. So if everything is all difficult because you think that the teacher thinks that the learner needs to learn something new, so it has to be challenging, but in the end, the learner will get everything wrong. So it's failure. It's failure to them. So consistent failure is it's not encouraging at all. Yeah, the next one is, of course, medium of doing work should be flexible and not just be restricted to paper. Learners actually get excited and motivated when they get to use the whiteboards, the iPads, even Post-its, or sometimes you don't even use any of these. You ask them to respond verbally because the objective is actually to get them to participate. and think about the work at hand. Okay, it's not always about the answers. It's not always about getting answers and then you mark the answers. No, it's about seeing whether they understand. Okay, so yeah, the last one is is tools like pencil grips. That's actually designed to aid learners with motor impairments to write comfortably. So I've actually used that before in my classes, and it has helped to improve the students' handwriting over time. So different learners also work at different speeds. So it should be acceptable to give them more time, right? So, and lastly, the environment, which is the classroom or at home where the student is learning, it should be, they should be conducive for them. So for example, avoid pasting all those posters in the classroom. It seems to be very informative, but for students with learning difficulties, it's not good for them because it's very they're very distracting. Okay, especially those with ADHD. Okay, if you have like 3 posters around your wall, they're not going to be listening to you. They're going to be looking at the posters. And another example is noisy environment will definitely trigger anxiety, especially when they are having difficulty trying to understand or finish this work that they have to do, and then the environment just gets noisy, or even students with autism, right? It will trigger anxiety and meltdowns. Okay, and that's not favorable at all. All right, so these are some examples of my own. These are examples in my own classroom where I've used different mediums to make the lessons more interactive, and the students definitely have enjoyed themselves. All right, so for this one student, he has trouble with attention and writing. So writing for him is very effortful. As you can see that he for the first few questions, I only required him to answer verbally. Okay, and try only a few of the questions. While the other students in the class, they were of course expected to fill it up because they are able to. Okay, so to avoid any anxiety, any task incompliance, this is what I did with this student. All right. So a very important strategy is to ensure your lessons are multi-sensory. Your 5 senses. Yeah. So personally, I would make sure my activities are stimulating at least 3 senses so that students are engaged. Try my best to include movement, especially for students who are unable to sit for long periods of time. And it's important to understand that they are actually thinking, they do actually think better when they move. Okay, so another example is fidgeting. All right, so I think in the past there was the fidget spinner. So that was a very common thing in the classroom, in the DS classrooms at that time. Now, yes, sometimes we see they will fiddle with their pencils or erasers or even blue tack. So that kind of behavior is actually okay in order to stay focused. So as teachers, we should be more understanding with why they are actually doing that. So for me and a lot of other teachers, as long as they don't disrupt others, okay, or as long as they are listening, like if I see them fidgeting, I will occasionally throw them questions, testing whether they are still listening or not. And most of the time they are. They're fidgeting, but they are able to answer questions. Yeah. So yeah, I love using manipulatives, games, and also to incorporate technology to keep them engaged. Dyslexic learners are usually put off by too many words. So visual aids are very important to help them understand better. And here are some more examples. These are instances where I included games, manipulatives, and hands-on activities in my lessons. And my students definitely learn better this way because their senses are ignited. So it actually helps them to participate. All right. So multisensory learning has also been proven to help learners retain better with what they've learned. So that it does improve their memory in the long run. And lastly, here are some examples of games and technology that I utilize in my classroom. Okay, so another very important strategy is actually to tailor lessons around the student's preference, hobbies, and likes. A very common one is drawing. What else? Oh, for boys, for example, they they follow trends nowadays. So their preference or hobbies could be like Mobile Legend or books like Dogman, Captain Underpants. So those things I've ever incorporated in my lessons, and they, of course, they love it. Yeah. And why do I do that? It's very important because it's to the teacher will be able to form rapport, right? So, for example, for me, I'm a specialist tutor with one student. The first lesson is very important because I need to build instant rapport and to motivate that student to keep coming back. So with activities that involve their hobbies, they are more interested to participate and therefore learn well. All right. So but the first one here is the learning style. Finding this out from some questionnaires, the teacher will then be able to plan more activities that stimulate that dominant style and therefore engage them further. Yeah, and lastly, we have rewards, very common in classrooms. Rewards can be effective, especially with younger students, but the type and frequency need to be carefully planned because not all rewards will give rise to the outcome that you expect. All right, so rewards are usually effective with the younger learners, right? So the older ones, it has no effect on them at all. So if they need help with their motivation, what I do instead of doing reward system, I will engage them in discussions, interesting discussions that happen in the week. You know, interesting news, news pieces of news, yeah. And then that's how, yeah, you know, I catch their attention for that day, and then we can start the lesson on on the right note. All right, so these pictures are actually me using Legos, more of the students using Legos to facilitate the activities. So definitely when they get to play around with those things like this, they will be more compliant, yeah. And here is an example of a writing task that began with getting the student to draw out the storyline. And this student absolutely loves drawing over writing, of course. But after doing this activity, it allows them, it makes him interested in actually writing out the story afterwards. Okay, so this is an example of allowing students to express in a way that they are most comfortable with. Here are some pictures of me and my students. All right, so this is a reward system. They were motivated by stickers every week. And on the right is a game that highlights a winner. But word of caution though, not every student can handle not winning. So it depends on the profile of your learners or class dynamic. If a student who can't handle losing the game actually means that they don't know their stuff, for example, yeah. So it depends on your class and your students. Lastly, here, awareness and acceptance is what I feel to be the most important of all. So the awareness of learning difficulties and acceptance of different pathways towards success and even the definition of success itself, you know. This should start with parents and teachers, as they have more influence over young minds and how these young minds perceive themselves. Awareness and acceptance from teachers are not only to help them tailor lessons, but to also educate the other students of the unique challenges their friend is facing. This in turn cultivates empathy and promotes inclusion in the learner's environment that will spur them on in their struggles. So a kind word is impactful as it can change a person's life. There's a lot more that we can do in terms of making learners feel included with their peers and the education system. All right, I've come to the end of my sharing for today. I really hope that you've managed to gain lots of takeaways from it. Okay, so yeah, please stay for the Q&A session that is coming right up.
Oh, Amira, you're there? Yes.
Hi.
Okay,
Thank
hi.
you,
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Wait, first, thanks, Amira. So interesting, your talk.
Yes, I was just going to say that. A lot of few tips you had given us as well.
Yeah.
Actually, let me start with one. I have one question actually for you, Amira.
Okay, sure.
What do I do when students can't deal with losing at quizzes? You know, some of them have apprehension they must always win, right? Or it's in our blood, right? We want to do. But what do you do actually, or those who really can't deal, or how do they take it? Do you want to elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, I think your question was from my sharing when I talked about the quizzes, right? Yeah, as teachers, even in mainstream schools, we see a lot of quizzes that the kids like to play, like Kahoot, things like that. So actually when that happens, it depends on how you look at the situation. So the teacher can avoid competitive games altogether because, you know, the lesson should be emotionally sound. Yes. But sometimes I may want to take the opportunity to teach resilience. So if I do choose the other option, I may take the opportunity, you know, to help them with that. And so this includes having the other students to encourage that one student. So I may pair up the student with another one, or even award the other, you know, non-winners of the game until finally they would be comfortable with not winning. But if you try to find the root of the issue, it's usually self-esteem. So that should be the focus, and it can be built over time.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Dee.
No worries, no worries. One of the parents actually had popped this out and asked, hi, so what's the strategy for dysgraphia? Any particular do and do nots that, you know, you may want to advise?
All right. So as discussed in the presentation, dysgraphia is mostly about their motor and information processing. So to tackle the motor processing, you can use tools like pencil grips, penmanship lines to help them write neatly and help in their handwriting. And even, you know, to gradually strengthen their muscles, they can do muscle exercises in their fingers, like squeezing clay or any other fine motor games. So that will help in strengthening their motor. And then regarding the information processing, you can practice with him to verbalize his ideas first before writing them down, so that they're not overwhelmed by the task itself. And you can even record him and then record him speaking, and then after that he can write while listening to himself. So that's one strategy. Yeah.
Okay.
I think to add to what Amira is saying, I think for the kids who are having dysgraphia and they don't have a lot of ideas, I think scaffolding, you know, and breaking it into small parts will then help support the child with just that small section,
as well as
so it's not a whole so much information, you know, so we scaffold.
Too much overload for the child.
Yeah, so just tend to do it in small chunks.
Yeah, definitely.
I've got a question here from another parent actually. Teachers have difficulties including hands-on activities during lessons. Any suggestion on how to have such activities for boring lessons on algebra and comprehension? Yes, our lifelong algebra.
You're the math teacher.
Yes.
All the math. Yeah, I think one of the very useful strategy is the multisensory one. Okay. For myself, whenever I plan my lesson, that will be the first thing, one of the first things that I consider, because as you know, we want to make them as stimulated as much as we can, and not just give them a worksheet and expect them to finish. So it's about stimulating their senses. So when you are planning, I think like I mentioned before, you consider, okay, do you want to stimulate their kinetic, you know, moving around or touching things, something that they can see or even hear, like songs. And mostly, yeah, you can incorporate them even in math lessons. The algebra, if you want to be specific, maybe you can cut out. Algebras have like different parts of the equation, right? So you can make cutouts and then something that they can move around, because they need to see it in front of them and not have it too abstract. Yeah, math is difficult because it's too abstract for them. Yeah, so comprehension, it can be chunks into a discussion between the teacher and the student. After you read a portion, you can have a discussion with them and what do they think about the story. So the students usually they like to interact like that.
I'm going to go to my next question actually, which I have in mind. You mentioned one of the important things is to build rapport, especially for newbies who've come into the class. What's your favorite way of doing something in class that will kickstart, you know, the rapport building between a teacher and kids, or between kids itself in a class sometimes, you know, or you have kids with STs one-to-one, but say if you have a group of class, how would you build that rapport? What is something that you would do, or as parents, can they do something to, you know?
So the building of rapport usually starts in the beginning. Maybe the first lesson or maybe the first few lessons. I like to incorporate their current favorite game, book, or even cartoon characters into the lesson. So sometimes it can be a reading material or even a theme for my worksheets or slides, or just simply add the pictures into my reward chart. So they really get excited because it becomes something that is common and something that they can talk to me about. And sometimes I also allow them to bring something from home and present it in front of the class. You know, they like to talk about it, so they will present it in front of the class and like a show and tell style. So they love that kind of attention. And if it's between the students themselves, they can share, sometimes they share the same interests. So when you bring it out, when you highlight those interests, they might connect in that way as well. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that information.
Sorry, Dee, there's one question that I saw.
Yes, I was coming to that.
Okay.
Is that about the level, is it?
Yeah. So
yes. Maybe you want to elaborate, Anna?
So the question is specialist training available to which level? Must it be at least P3? Well, the good news is at the DAS, we believe in early intervention, really. So so for the group classes as well as one-on-one, we start from kindergarten. The earlier, the better, so that we can narrow the gap to the child's, where there's gaps to their learning. We adopt like a problem-solving approach to specialist tutoring. So this is slightly different from the group classes in that we are targeted, we do a targeted approach. So if the child, and we take it all the way really up to tertiary, young adults even we support. Whatever
young adults as in, do we go on to 17, 18, do we?
Yes, or tertiary.
Tertiary as well, okay.
Medical students. Adults tend to have the challenge of time management. Because of that, they may be really smart and having, having reached academic levels to get into tertiary. And some people say, oh, why you can't have problems, but they really do. They have this challenge of time, of managing executive functioning, and all that gets in their way of the success. So yeah, we support from primary kindergarten all the way to adults. Hope that answers. Yeah, if we can't answer, we will look through the questions and reply. Thanks for your questions, everyone. Dee,
I think we're coming to almost reaching the end of Q&A. I've got one more question that's there. Parents or anyone, please feel free to write in your Q&A. It's a good session. We're getting quite a few. There's one here that a parent had asked, would the school MOE grant child extra time during exams if I provide the psychological report from DAS? I have tried applying since my child is in primary 1. Till now, she's in primary 5, but the extra time was not approved. Are you able to?
I think I'll attempt at that question. Don't quote me completely. Anyway, I think what we need to consider is that whether the report is from the DAS or whether it's external, any psychological report needs to have a recommendation, you know. So not all psychologists recommend extra time, because based on the assessment that they have conducted with the child, and on their cognitive, the pace of learning, they've put together a picture. So this picture says the child needs extra time in order to be on par with his peers, and then they maybe give 15 minutes of an extra time depending, and then they will explain. So I would say it needs to be in the report that the extra time is recommended, and that has the strength then to go to the school and to say my psychologist has recommended it.
Okay. There are a lot of thank yous in the feedback as well as in the Q&A. Thank you so much, all of y'all. We're going to slowly wrap this up. And any questions or anything that you want to
share? Can be here all afternoon. This is so fun. I'm enjoying myself. How about you, Amira?
Can I just take one? Can I just take one question? I think there's one question about ADHD.
Answer one more.
I just would like to answer one on ADHD. I think a parent asked about ADHD and exams. So how do we actually eventually train them to be able to sit through an exam, which is a very valid in intervention. Of course, we have strategies in place to train them, but then when it comes to the exams itself, is the real thing. So I would say that it's the backhand preparation then. So for example, at home, you may be training the table time. So you can use a timer and then give some short durations of work with breaks in between. So you do that and then gradually increase the time for table time and work towards like the full 1 hour, for example. And then of course schools have accommodations for that, like extra time, separate room. So parents should really look into applying for accommodations. Okay.
Thanks, Amira. Okay, I'm going to round up now. If you're unable to answer some of your questions live, not to worry, we will send them via email by reply. We will also be collating all the questions and get back to you all soon, okay? If nothing is there, thank you everybody for attending this webinar and being such wonderful participants. As part of our 10th year anniversary, the DAS International, our next webinar will be held on the 25th of March. So look out for that and register, not to worry. It's about how to manage material, time, and information. Right? We look forward to seeing you all soon. And before we end, let me pass you over to Ms. Annaberta, who'd like to say a few words and close the session for today. Enjoy.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Dee, for the roundup. I'd like to thank our specialist teacher, Ms. Amira, today for really taking time of your busy teaching schedule.
Thank you.
Through sharing of your personal insights and experience gained in supporting our students with specific learning differences in the classroom. And I'd like to thank everyone here who have joined us today. From DAS International, we wish everyone a really safe space at this time for you, your family, and your community. And we really look forward to seeing everyone again and joining us for our Spotlight series. Thank you.
Okay.